What I know is that people don't like change. They may say they like change, but when it comes down to it, we all like our comfort zone. We're comfortable the way we're used to doing it, and even if we see benefits to changing things, we kind of prefer sticking with our usual routine. Well, Office 2007 and Office 2010 is no different. In 2007, there was a lot of feedback that people didn't like all the changes, that they were having a hard time getting used to the ribbon, and we were kind of prepared for that. But they also said they needed things like their custom toolbars back. Well, so far the interface looks pretty much the same as it was in 2007. But I want you to take a closer look. Other than being able to just use the tabs and the ribbons and things like that, we also had another complaint, and that was that many people on the upper left of the screen saw this big round thing that had an Office icon on it. It's actually called the MOB, or the Microsoft Office button. What I found really interesting as I trained people is that most people didn't know it was actually a button. They thought it was just an icon, something pretty, some eye candy, if you will, as part of the interface. And so when people would say, well, I love 2007, but geez, I can't even figure out how to do something simple like save or print. And I would always kind of wrinkle up my brow and go, how can they not know how to print? It's where it's always been. It's just a button instead of saying file. Well, guess what? I understand it now that I know that many people didn't realize that was a button. And I don't want to say we're regressing, but if you take a look at 2010, you will see there's no Office button. We've gone back to File, in this case a File tab. So yes, Microsoft does listen, and they know that we need to do certain things that make it intuitive. And obviously the MOB button was not intuitive. But I don't want you to call this File menu. I guess you could refer to it as the File tab, but more importantly, when you click on it, what it does is it exposes an entire set of information known as the Backstage view. A while ago, actually a long time ago, Microsoft developers and designers realized that a change was needed. Through the brainstorming and process mapping and everything else that goes on that we never get to see, they realized that a majority of things people did were considered inactivities. It's things that they did inside of a document or inside of a file, like adding content or formatting text. They also realized that most of these inactivities were not best represented by text-based dialog boxes and drop-down lists, but instead by visual representations like galleries and actually seeing the effects of choice on the screen before we made the choice. That's what we saw in 2007. That's the general basis of the Fluent interface. But it didn't take into account the other things, which are sometimes known as out activities. These are much harder to visualize, but we still have to have easy, intuitive access to them. These are activities like saving, printing, protecting, and sharing a file. So without going into too much detail, that's why Office 2010 now has the File tab and displays the Backstage view. The Backstage view is where we get to see all of these little out activities in one single, simple-to-access place where options aren't hidden behind layer after layer of menus and toolbars. Naturally, we get to see some things we'd expect, like save and save as, open and close. We're not going to take time to think about those, of course, because we already know about those. What I want to focus on right now is the default view that opens when you show the Backstage view with the document open, and that's something called the Info panel. This is really a treasure of information, all with one click. By opening the Backstage, we get to find out all kinds of things. First of all, we can see the title of our document and the full path for that document as well. Then we get into some different categories. For example, I can talk about the compatibility mode. Right now this document is in the older file format, so we can see that some of the newer features might be disabled. We can also explore settings for things like permissions and security. For example, who can open, copy, or change the file. What we see for each of these categories in the Backstage is a brief description and also some specifics about the current file. To the left, we can also see either a button or a drop-down. For example, convert is the only thing you can do, so it's a button. But for this one, what we see is a drop-down that gives us some options, things that we can do that have to do with the security. For example, we can modify the settings for marking it as final, restricting editing permissions, and even applying a digital signature. Moving on down, we can also talk about sharing, and that's really a big thing for Office 2010 because we know that sharing and collaboration is huge and people do it all the time. So what do we need to know? Well, again, without even accessing anything else, we can see that there are some things we need to be aware of. Document properties, author's name, and related dates are located in this document, and we might want to remove them. We can take a look at things like headers and footers and content that can't be checked for accessibility because of the current file type. If we pause over them, you can see that we get tooltips to give us a little bit more information, and of course we also can access the tools for working with any one of these things by clicking on the options on the left. Lastly, we also have versions. Versions have kind of been revised and updated for this version of Office, so there are some things to see there as well. But I also want you to pay attention to the fact that there's information on the far right of this screen as well. This is where we get into all of our document properties. In prior versions, we had to dig down into 2 or 3 different places to see all of this information, but now it's all exposed right here. We can take a look at the basic things, like the size of the file, how many pages it is, how much editing time we've had. We can look at all kinds of dates, such as when it was modified, created, and last printed. We can also talk about people, because another one of the priorities for Office 2010 is not only the sharing of documents, but also sharing them with others, knowing who's working on things, who modified it last, and those types of things. Here you can see that I am the original author, but when it talks about who last modified it, it says Total Office 2010, because that's the profile I'm currently logged in on in this computer. And that becomes important because of the last item that we have in Properties. There's something called Open the File Location to find if there are any related documents. Office 2010 assumes that you're going to keep related documents in the same folder, so it gives me a link that allows me to open that location directly from within the document. So for example, if I had a contract for training and some course descriptions and maybe some other types of things, a statement of work, those types of activities and documents, I could open them all right from within one document. So we get to see all of that detailed information about a file by simply opening the Backstage view. By the way, if you don't have any files open in Word, when you display the Backstage, it defaults to the Recent option, since there's actually no information to show about a file that you don't have open. Now, I know that all of this may seem a little unimportant. You say, okay, I get it, but why would I care about this? It really is important, though, for people who do use this kind of information within their documents, who work with collaboration, versions, security, all of those different issues, because we now have it all exposed right here. And in this case, exposure is a good thing. It's not even really about any new features per se, it's about exposing things that have always been there, but most people simply didn't know that they were there, or they couldn't access them because they had to go through too many clicks to do so. So this entire view at the Backstage is really a phenomenal thing, and I think you're going to love it once you get used to it. Another perfect example of an improvement like this is the print command. I'm going to go ahead and click that option and show you that they have finally revised the old print dialog box that has remained basically unchanged for years and years. They still have, of course, the same options. We have to know how many copies we want, what printer we want to use, but they've rearranged them so that they're easier, more accessible, and more intuitive. For example, the number one thing we often want to do is change the number of copies, so that's right at the top. The second thing is to select the printer, and we can do that very easily as well. In addition, we can get to printer properties by simply clicking on the link. What's even better, though, about this new revision is we have a lot of settings, again, exposed without having to go through several clicks. So I can see the opportunity to work with different types of pages. For example, printing all of the pages, printing a selection, printing a current page, or a custom range. I can also, of course, still print things like document properties and markup. I'm just going to press Escape to get out of this without making a choice. Down below that choice, we still have the text box where we can type in ranges or selections. For example, 1,3-5 would be printing page 1, 3, 4, and 5. You may notice that they've actually removed the instructions for that because most people now know how to do that type of thing within one print job. But if you don't, you can always go ahead and click over here on the Info button, or just pause your mouse over it and see the tooltip that shows you how to type in the number of pages. We also can work with the document properties. I can choose to print this one-sided or duplex, depending on if my printer allows us to do that, and I can collate it, but I also can change things like the orientation of the page, portrait or landscape, the size of the paper, and even work with the margins. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, I get to see that there is actually a page setup link as well. But what this particular print revision does in 2010 is it exposes to me all the things I usually want to do, not only just for the printer, but also how the printer works and how the page is set up so that I can carry out print activities by only having to come into one location. Another huge change, though, is that your print preview is now included as part of the print panel in the Backstage view. It's not a separate window or command anymore. We can see it here on the right side, and we also have controls at the bottom of the screen to move between pages. With this view enabled, we can use our zoom controls on the bottom right of the screen to zoom the preview just like we would normally zoom a regular page. In addition to the stuff we've already taken a look at, there are also some options that follow print, like sharing, help, options, and exit. I'm going to go ahead and just press my escape key to get out of the Backstage view for a moment and remind you that when you first go in, you're going to see that Info tab, and if that's not the information you need, you can select any one of these other options to continue with the activities that you want to do, generally categorized as out activities. Whether you want to use that new terminology or not, though, I think everybody can see that the Backstage view is a real improvement over even what 2007 had to offer by exposing a lot of information we need and being able to use it simply and more quickly.